I haven't really discussed Andor on my channel at all, but to be clear, me neglecting to cover this 2-season Disney Plus Star Wars show that acts as a prequel to Rogue One, a Star Wars story, has nothing to do with the overall quality of this said Star Wars show. Because to be clear, Andor is arguably the best Star Wars movie or show that Disney has made since acquiring the IP. You know, because Disney acquired the IP via its infinite pool of cash, as if purchasing a mega blockbuster franchise that appeals to an entire demographic that Disney overwhelmingly ignores, #TheBoys, was also a literal cheat code. But anyway, the point. Andor is the best Star Wars movie or show Disney has produced, surpassing The Mandalorian's homage to Star Wars' Western and samurai film inspiration, and The Last Jedi's inventive subversion yet embracement of the Star Wars brand's legacy, or at least until the rise of Skywalker screwed it up for everyone for no good reason. Great job, guys. That's sarcasm. In other words, Andor was the best of them. And the reason for this is fairly simple. See, Andor utilizes the inherent nature of its setting in the Star Wars timeline, which is to say that the series takes place when the evil Galactic Empire ruled the galaxy, whereas the heroic Rebel Alliance resist. A conflict that can clearly be defined on the good and evil binary that even small children can understand. I mean, look at these human and expressive characters, the bright colors of the droids, and a token cuddly furry. These must be the good guys. Now gaze at these masked indistinguishable soldiers, this cyborg that could kill a guy by just falling on top of them, and of course this decrepit old geezer in the galaxy's best gaming chair. These are clearly the bad guys, obviously. This isn't rocket science. Hell, it's not even hot dog science. This science is as basic as my Starbucks order. But Andor takes this incredibly simplistic moral paradigm and purposefully complicates it, not in a way where the protagonists and the antagonists lose their heroic or villainous distinctions, but rather in the more nuanced portrayal of ideologies and beliefs inherent to those aforementioned good guys and bad guys during this era of the Star Wars timeline. Which is to say that Andor, as a show, is very political, because it's about fascism. Which, yes, I know that Star Wars has always been political, and is often about fascism and those who fight against it, but once again, that portrayal, as I said earlier, generally isn't very complex. I mean, come on, it's easy for people of all ages and education backgrounds to easily digest. They don't even need a Boba Fett laxative for that shit. But where Star Wars is generally more fantastical, and to be clear, that's not a bad thing in and of itself, I love that stuff, Andor is far more deliberate with its narrative and thematic intentions, with the inherent politics in the Star Wars franchise. And this is by design. Andor's showrunner Tony Gilroy detailed his philosophy behind the series in an interview with a Hollywood Reporter, link in the description. To quote, "Andor is a story about authoritarianism and fascism, and the Empire is very clearly a great example of that. It's a great place to deal with those issues, and as we've discussed many times before, we had this wide open canvas to deal with it." End quote. Admittedly, at the time of release, the actors and other creatives that participated in Andor's promotional tour didn't verbally say the word fascism, because Disney forbade them from saying that scandalous F word, but it was fairly clear what odious political ideology that they were referring to. Per Tony Gilroy in his interview with the Hollywood Reporter, the actors have a broad spectrum of political ideas, and we didn't want anybody to perjure themselves or violate their conscience. So we came up with a legit historical model, and it's a version of what I'm telling you now. We studied history to make the show, and we based it on historical models. We don't have a crystal ball. There's comps for everything that we did all through history. So that was a very, very safe and legitimate place for us to sell the show without ever having to say what I'm free to say now. End quote. So yeah, even when they were kind of tiptoeing around it, the show is about fascism, meaning that Andor, no relation, ultimately examines the Rebel Alliance versus Galactic Empire conflict and then magnifies and expands upon the politics underpinning both of those factions, truly capturing the battle against fascism. How relatable. However, before we dive further into this topic, this video is sort of a review, so I'm gonna go over the story a little bit. Andor's story follows, it follows a lot of people who are either in Rogue One, which remember is a movie that Andor is a prequel to, or are new to the continuity. But let's start with Diego Luna's Cassian Andor. Long before his tenure as a good soldier of the Rebel Alliance, he was a scoundrel looking out for himself, his close family, and friends like Adria Arjona's Bix, who Cassian also has the hots for, because Goral. On one fateful night, Cassian is involved in an altercation that ends with a dead security guard, and after a series of unfortunate events, no relation, Cassian is on the run from law enforcement, including that of the Empire, and is paid to do some jobs on behalf of the up-and-coming rebellion. And from there, Andor eventually discovers what it's like to fight for something beyond himself and those close to him. Andor works for many reasons. The action, while definitely up to Star Wars standard, is secondary to the drama. The show is paced in arcs and storylines that take multiple episodes to set up, but my god is the payoff satisfying. The sets, costumes, and overall production are second to none. The cinematography is breathtaking. The ensemble cast is fantastic from top to bottom, who all posit believable performances to where all the characters, even the most morally complex or adversarial ones, are humanized. Yes, even those who are firmly pro-Empire. And then finally, the shot placement and actor blocking is terrific and influences what the audience feels about particular scenes and characters. With all of that being said though, Andor's writing and direction, the way it ties all of those aforementioned elements together to create something that is both narratively and thematically greater than the sum of the show's already stellar parts, is the trait that reigns supreme here. Mostly because the Empire, as depicted in Andor, reflects the bleak reality of a fascist entity consolidating power, all while showcasing the cost of rebellion against those same vile powers, and ultimately why resisting them is worth doing even despite the cost and risk, which allows the show to be simultaneously grim with its portrayal of how much suffering that fascism causes, yet inspiring because it showcases protagonists who persevere anyway by fighting for a better tomorrow. Meaning that, more accurate than a stormtrooper's notoriously shit aim, Andor hits its narrative and thematic target head on. To explain why this is the case, let's start with the Imperial faction. Throughout Andor's 2 seasons, the Empire engages in various injustices and atrocities ranging from colonization to secret prison labor camps filled with people sentenced with unfair trials, papers, please style of immigration checks, genocide, and many other types of catastrophic horrors, which all are appalling acts that fascist governments engage in, both past and present. Acts that require socially and politically acceptable malcontent from the perpetrators and effective propaganda that minimizes public scrutiny, allowing the fascist government to get away with their crimes without immediate social or political repercussions, just like the city of Cincinnati's attempts to sell the innocent and unsuspecting general public on the merits of Skyline chili, which, to be clear, has no merits. However, the portrayal of violent fascist acts isn't enough. Hell, the show would need to provide the audience valuable insight into the mind of fascist operatives and government officials, because after all, despite the inhumane cruelty they proudly enforce and often personally display, fascists are people too, albeit awful, morally bankrupt people that deserve to be ostracized and publicly shamed as if they were an actor in The Phantom Menace. What I'm trying to say is that, despite their depraved acts of cruelty and their barbaric ideology, fascists are humans too, or at least human in the sense that they have human motivations rather than being mustache-twirling evil beings or this fucking guy. They have their own wants, desires, goals, and personal lives. And Andor captures the essence of that through its Imperial point of view characters, most notably Dedra, who is played by Denise Goh, who, fun fact, voices Yennefer in The Witcher 3: The Wild Hunt. So now you know that factoid. You're welcome. Dedra is an interesting character because she undergoes a woman in the workplace sort of narrative that is borderline feminist, which, to be clear, it's definitely not feminist for obvious reasons. Put a pin in that for now, we'll get back to it in a second. In fact, Daedra's character journey is adjacent to something like Clarice Starling in Silence of the Lambs, a woman navigating a male-dominated work environment that reeks of condescension and misogyny, which stinky, and eventually proving those same men wrong by being hyper-competent, which results in career advancement, whereas the careers of her less intelligent male colleagues become stagnant. Additionally, the scenes involving Daedra watch like that of an espionage thriller, plus the aforementioned feminist undertones, which normally I'd be like, hell yeah, girl, slay. But here is the thing, there's just one small problem. And that problem is that Daedra is a fascist. See, Daedra is an ISB agent, and for those not in the know with their Star Wars acronyms, shame on you, ISB is not another form of thumb drive, but instead stands for Imperial Security Bureau, meaning that Daedra is essentially employed by the Galactic Empire's intelligence agency, meaning that, by design, any sort of girl power narrative is blunted by the whole fascism thing, which ensures that we don't root or even have sympathy for her. But with that said, Daedra's character journey, her arc, does make her a little bit more human. Not necessarily understandable because, once again, fascist, but rather because she's a woman with motivations that are grimly believable, that she has this need of achieving results for the Imperial government, and that she desires to prove herself to that said Imperial government. Daedra is just a very interesting, yet very detestable antagonist. Kyle Soller Cyril, no relation, is another intriguing foe, but for different reasons. Like Daedra, Cyril believes in the Imperial government, but from a different angle, where Daedra is proudly Imperial because she witnesses and is aware of the Galactic Empire's atrocities, and that the ends ultimately justifies the means when it comes to the Empire's galactic hegemony. Cyril, on the other hand, isn't all that privy to these facts. In fact, he works some security and data jobs, but overwhelmingly supports the Galactic Empire due to how he agrees with the Empire's stated goal of bringing order to the galaxy, and because he has swallowed the Empire's propaganda wholesale. He eats that bullshit up even though it's rotting his brain. However, Cyril is especially interesting to me because he's definitely OCD coded. Like, he is organized, clean, and composed to a fault. Like, beyond the range of acceptability and more in the territory of, well, that's weird. Additionally, Cyril is obsessed with his search for Cassian Andor because, for reasons of plot, Cyril believes that Cassian is a threat to the Empire, which is technically correct, and that Cyril was personally wronged by him, even though Cassian doesn't even know who he is. Like, Cyril purveys Cassian as being his arch nemesis, but Cassian, on the other hand, is just blissfully unaware of Cyril's existence, which is just objectively funny as shit. But Cyril's most important OCD quirk, the one that's far more subtle than hand-washing, or the uninvited urge for us to organize our criterion collections and categories that only make sense in our brains and to no one else, is in how much he blindly accepts the sense of order promoted by the Empire. Like, he's ready to get down on his knees for authority, and not in the fun way. Sure, a common component of obsessive-compulsive disorder can involve being paranoid of the government, because, speaking as someone with OCD, I used to believe that the government had a file on me, and that my jaywalking reign would come to an unceremonious end if and when the government deemed it necessary to send in the SWAT team through my doors, windows, and toilets. I'm just living on borrowed time. But with that being said, there can be another side to OCD, which is to blindly obey authority, to accept and thus obey the words, rules, and laws of authority figures due to the mistaken notion that these laws, rules, and political apparatuses must be in place due to how just they are, due to how necessary they are. It's something that OCD folks can do because the truth would be far more frightening, especially for someone with an anxiety disorder like OCD. That these people and governments don't have our best interests at heart. That despite these governments' need for control, they are actually out of control. That they don't regularly violate the rights of citizens in sovereign nations. That they don't commit crimes against humanity and then lie about it. Meaning that for someone with OCD, it's tempting to always acquiesce to the law and authority without dwelling too much on the holes in the government propaganda, because that would just invite overwhelming anxiety, because this supposed desire for order and justice would then become compromised by the awful truth that the government is evil and is designed to hurt and even murder people, which means that us blindly obeying them implicates us as well. It makes us complicit, because for an apt metaphor, our hands would be unclean, which is why I use soft soap, which is the sponsor of today's video. I'm just kidding, guys. I'm not sponsored by anybody. That's a joke. I'm not popular enough to be sponsored by anybody. But in order to get me there someday, please like and subscribe and comment and all that shit. The Rylers has bills to pay. And this humanizes Cyril. Even though yes, he is an antagonist, and yes, he is an immensely weird man, but Cyril has his own beliefs and values beyond being he's a bad guy because he dresses in black and believes in power for the sake of power, or looks like a worm with sex slaves. Ensuring that despite living within a space fantasy setting, Cyril feels real as a result, that he feels like a fully fledged human being, albeit a very strange one. Now, with Andor's primary antagonists out of the way, let's discuss some of our heroes, or anti-heroes rather. That might be the more correct term here. Starting with our lead, Cassian Andor's character arc is reminiscent to that of Han Solo's, in that he is primarily living for himself and those in his immediate social proximity. But after Cassian enters the employ of Stellan Skarsgård's resistant mastermind, Luthen Rael, more on him in a bit, he sees and experiences the depraved barbarism at the heart of the Galactic Empire's ideology and how it wields its power. He witnesses the suffering that they cause, and he can't help but be won over by the rebellion's just cause. Also, don't get mad at me for talking about this arc. It's not a spoiler. We have seen the end result of Cassian's arc in Rogue One. Additionally, Cassian is a likable character to follow, one who may never receive public recognition for his contributions to the Rebel Alliance, but a man of action who is content to do his part in the effort to destroy the Empire, meaning that Cassian's scoundrel to hero arc might not necessarily be new to the Star Wars franchise, but it might just be the best execution of that said arc. It also helps that Diego Luna is cool and charming and sells the shit out of this performance, so that's important too. Now let's move on to Luthen Rael. See, Luthen is a fascinating character because, despite how he is ideologically aligned with the good guys, he is far removed from being heroic. Instead, he plots the Empire's downfall in the margins, ensuring that few people know about his exploits, many of which are morally dubious. And I'm not talking about pissing in Lake Michigan or putting ketchup on a hot dog. I'm talking about some real shit. In fact, Luthen is willing to let allies and innocents alike be captured or killed if it means furthering the end goal of dropping the Empire into the intergalactic dumpster. No relation. So yeah, Luthen is a very compelling character to follow because we don't really see good guys, or at least people who are ideologically aligned with the good guys, this morally complex in the Star Wars series. It's a fresh take. The final rebel character we will be discussing in today's episode is Genevieve O'Reilly's Senator Mon Mothma. No relation. As a politician, Mothma is an outspoken opponent of the Empire, but has a tough time winning whilst in the political arena due to how the deck is constantly stacked against her in favor of the Empire's draconian policies, meaning that on the Senate floor, she generally always loses and just has to grin and bear it, because the Galactic Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act as well. Fuck you too, Justice Jar Jar. However, these political losses cover for some of Mothma's under-the-table dealings in terms of funding Luthen's guerrilla war effort, so she contributes to the burgeoning rebellion in that way as well. But even with that said, Mothma compromises her morals here as well due to how the Empire is closely examining her finances and thus needs to find a workaround. In other words, Mon Mothma sacrifices her safety and even virtues in her attempts to undermine the Empire's authority, which makes her a very sympathetic character. There are admittedly a lot of other characters in the show that participate in the rebellion, but I'm gonna stop there just because, talking about every character in this show would make this video like an hour long, And this video has already gone longer than my usual. And anyway, you understand the point I'm getting at. Because all of these characters place their lives on the line, and some even compromise their own values, because combating an autocracy is worth the risk, even with the major power disadvantage, because despite an authoritarian government's constant need for control, people standing up for what they believe in will always undermine that said need for control. And better yet, resistance is contagious, because when citizens witness one person saying no to an unjust, corrupt government, it inspires more people to speak up. And eventually the amount of people speaking up will increase until a nation reaches a boiling point. A boiling point where a fascist political power advantage is countered by the growing numbers of regular people. When citizens of all types say no, we don't want that shit. And that's Andor's genius. Beyond being an impeccably written, crafted, and acted show, Andor is inspiring for those of us living under such Orwellian governments at the moment, because it shows that resistance, even in the small things, matters. It is important. Sure, Andor as a show can be bleak at times, because it often portrays resistance's heavy toll that is exacted by a vile government, but Andor also conveys why resistance is necessary, why it's required, meaning that Andor proves that the only people that can save us are ourselves. So yeah, thank you for watching another episode of Biological Riley. Please like, subscribe, share, and leave a comment telling me what you thought of this video and its respective topic. Also, definitely consider supporting my channel and Patreon, which will allow you to see some early access videos and allow your name to be seen on the credits here. If Patreon isn't your jam right now, you can still support my channel through a one-time donation via Ko-fi, which will earn you a temporary credit for videos released in the following month. Any financial assistance is always appreciated. Links in the description. Thanks again for the support. See you next time.